Welcome to Military Analytics. The lack of war between Ukraine and Russia will be broken in Crimea about the continued resistance to Russia's last war of conquest in 2022. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that it started with Crimea. It will end with Crimea. Reclaiming the peninsula is perhaps Kyiv's most ambitious war goal, extending to the Black Sea and bordering the Sea of Azov. On one side, Crimea is a vital piece of the regional strategic puzzle and key to protecting lucrative commercial shipping routes. But Ukraine will have to fight hard for such an award. Russian forces are reportedly preparing their approach from the peninsula and southern Ukraine for a counterattack in this direction. Smoke rose from the Kerch Bridge when the Russian Black Sea Fleet spy ship was attacked by 3 drones at dawn yesterday morning. An official from Crimea's Russian-backed administration said the Kerch Bridge, which connects the Crimean Peninsula to Russia's Krasnodar region, reopened on Wednesday after being closed for a few hours for drills. The Crimean Bridge was closed due to the exercise in the region, said Sergei Aksionov, the head of Crimea annexed by Putin. Aksionov said that traffic will be back to normal in a few hours. I urge everyone to trust only reliable sources of information regarding these statements from the Crimean official. The inhabitants of the peninsula were seriously worried because Crimea is a critical region that is constantly the scene of airstrikes. For this reason, the inhabitants of the peninsula accelerated their escape plans after Aksionov's statements, and even people selling their houses in Crimea appeared. The people of the peninsula do not want to live in a great chaotic environment. In this regard, the Russian authorities are trying to appease the people in Crimea by hiding the existence of the danger. Moscow uses its own media powers for this because Russian media reported that the smoke on the Crimean Bridge was the result of a military exercise. But video footage posted on Telegram showed white smoke rising from the bridge's main central opening and more smoke rising from one of the crossing points. In recent days, Russia has banned all trucks from the bridge, citing security concerns. When Putin's deputy prime minister announced the decision, the local radio station posted footage of him smoking on the Kerch Bridge on social media. This video, circulating on social media, shows a huge cloud of smoke rising from the Crimean Bridge. They also shared photos and videos showing the dense smoke rising above the walkway. Vehicle queues to Russia were seen on the occupied peninsula. A drone attack on May 3 triggered a massive explosion at an oil depot near the bridge, raising suspicions that the Ukrainian armed forces might try to mount another attack. The Crimean Bridge connects the Taman Peninsula in mainland Russia with a currently Russian-occupied Ukrainian Kerch Peninsula. A Russian official stated that an oil depot located near the strategically important Kerch Strait Bridge, which connects Russia with Crimea, burned down. Veniamin Kondratiev, governor of southern Russia's Krasnodar region, reported on his Telegram channel that an oil storage tank caught fire in the village of Volna, near the port of Taman, and the fire was classified as the highest severity. Volna is located near the Kerch Strait Bridge, Russia's only land link with the illegally annexed Crimean Peninsula, and an important supply route for Russian forces amid the ongoing war in Ukraine. The latest fire came days after Russia blamed Ukraine for another fire at an oil depot in the Crimean port of Sevastopol. At that time, traffic on the Crimean Bridge was temporarily stopped by the invaders due to the alleged threat of a missile attack. These explosions on and around the Kerch Bridge come days after a former Ukrainian advisor said a Kiev counterattack would target the strategically vital Kerch Strait Bridge connecting Russia to Crimea. Alexei Arestovich, who served as an advisor to the Ukrainian presidency until he resigned earlier this year, suggested that one of the targets of Ukraine's counterattack could be an operation in the south of the country to try to separate the Russians from the land corridor leading to Crimea. Zelensky promised last summer to reverse Russia's 9-year illegal annexation of Crimea. In recent weeks, extensive fortifications have been spotted off the coast of Crimea, and the Russians have asked a Polish naval base as Russia prepares for the Ukrainian advance. According to Arestovich, the Ukrainian armed forces will launch an attack on the Kerch Bridge, which is Russia's only land link with the annexed Crimean Peninsula. He said the Crimean Bridge would be the only supply channel for the peninsula if the Ukrainian troops succeed in closing the narrow isthmus that connects Crimea with the mainland of Ukraine. According to Arestovich, if the Ukrainian armed forces manage to destroy it, the peninsula will be left without help. Arestovich said, "We will demolish the Crimean Bridge. All this is possible under certain conditions. We are currently adjusting the conditions, beginning with Ukraine's long-awaited spring counteroffensive. Retired Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, formerly the commander of the U.S. Army Europe, laid out the key formations from which Kiev troops could capture Crimea. Mr. Hodges said there are various ways Ukrainians think about it. Obviously, they know the geography, the history, the weather. They know what the Russians are up to there. I think that they have near-perfect intelligence on what's going on in Crimea. And I certainly hope we've helped. Kiev will not be able to secure commercial shipping in the Black Sea unless it liberates the peninsula. If the Russians continue to control Crimea because of some kind of peace treaty, Ukraine will never be able to rebuild its economy because Crimea blocks entry and exit to the Sea of Azov. What can Kiev do to mitigate the Russian threat from Crimea? Ben Hodges said, "You're going to isolate the peninsula first. When you look at the map, it starts to look more and more like a trap, perhaps a dead end for the Russians. And you can isolate it by cutting the land bridge first. The land bridge stretching from the southwestern Russian border west of Rostov-on-Don to occupied Donetsk, Mariupol, Berdyansk, Melitopol, and the Dnieper River is Moscow's greatest achievement in more than a year of war. Russia's land corridor from south to east of Ukraine allows it to better supply the Crimean Peninsula, which is dependent on the Kerch Strait Bridge. A Ukrainian journey south from Zaporizhia and east from Kherson could endanger this vital corridor if Ukrainian forces can reach the threshold of Crimea. Many of the peninsula's most sensitive military and infrastructure targets will be in range. Ukrainian troops have proven adept at using domestic technology as well as long-range Western munitions to target Russian command posts, troop concentrations, and supply centers. Crimea offers multiple targets, including the Sevastopol naval base and the Saki air base, both of which have already been attacked. Kiev will have to make a decision on what to do with the Kerch Strait Bridge, which was targeted by Ukrainians last year. The bridge was sensationally attacked last October, causing significant structural damage. This file aerial photograph taken on November 8, 2022, and published by the Russian Federal Highway Agency Rostov shows that repair work on the damaged sections of the Kerch Bridge connecting Russia to Crimea, hit by the explosion on October 8, 2022. Car and rail traffic stopped after the explosion on the Crimean Bridge, which damaged both lanes in October 2022. The 12-mile road and rail bridge were damaged in an explosion last October in an attack that the Kremlin says was orchestrated by Ukrainian security forces. But Ukraine has not claimed responsibility. Crimea was annexed from Ukraine by Russia in 2014, but is internationally recognized as part of Ukraine. Ukraine had previously managed to attack a Russian warship. They had managed to hit Russia's flagship Moskva, and the ship then caught fire and sank. In April, pictures that emerged after the ship sank appeared to have been taken from a salvage ship next to the crashed Russian warship. There was damage to the left side of the ship, flames burning below deck, and a thick layer of black smoke rising into the sky. Moskva is shown leaning on the port side, low in the water, and apparently deployed lifeboats without any crew on board in sight. The rear helicopter door of the ship was also open. This indicated that the plane had taken official. It also looked like there was a fire truck behind the ship spraying water into the air. In summary, the clues that emerged later reveal that the Moscow administration actually hid some critical data from the press and its own people. But sooner or later, the truth comes out. Ukrainians also declare that they will eventually liberate Crimea. The war between Ukraine and Russia has reached a stalemate in the Donbas region, while the Ukrainian armed forces remained in a defensive position, especially in this region at the beginning of the war. It has started to carry out very active offensive operations in the last few months. The priority front line where Ukrainians are concentrated in Donbas is the city of Bakhmut. Violent clashes have been going on here for more than 10 months. Although Bakhmut is said to have symbolic significance, there are critical connecting roads such as Kromov to the northwest of the city and Ivanovsky to the southwest. These supply routes also give Bakhmut strategic value because the city of Bakhmut has now formed a bridge between Luhansk and Donetsk. For this reason, both sides of the war are very keen to gain dominance of the city. The Ukrainian side has recently started to deploy its special forces to the field in order to seize Bakhmut, especially in the southern line of Bakhmut. There is a very special unit fighting for the Ukrainian army, trying to control an area almost as far as the city of Irpin. This unit is the 3rd Assault Brigade, also known as the Azov Regiment. This striking brigade has begun to complicate the work of the Russian forces in the southern line of Bakhmut in recent days. The Azov Regiment, which supported the troops of the Ukrainian army in this region, actually took a much more active position after the Russians drove the Wagner forces back to the front line. This change of position of the Azov Regiment began to take effect in a short time. The legendary special force of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, the Azov Regiment, recently launched an incredible offensive operation in the southern direction of Bakhmut. Ukraine's legendary brigade reported that in the southern trenches of the city, they managed to repulse Russian forces at a length of 1,730 meters and a depth of 700 meters. As a result of this striking operation in the Bakhmut trenches, 23 Russian soldiers were killed and more than 40 injured. In addition, in the operation organized by the Azov Regiment, dozens of military equipment, including tanks belonging to the Russian army in Bakhmut, were destroyed. After the capture of the Russian military equipment, the 3rd Assault Brigade also managed to capture a detachment of Russian soldiers during the attack on Russian positions in the city of Bakhmut. A dozen Russian soldiers from the so-called Stormzy units of the Russian 72nd Brigade were captured by the Azov Regiment. One of them was an ex-convict, and this person had participated in clashes for 3 days at the front near Bakhmut. Ukrainian sources reported that the captured person had an important duty and responsibility for the Russian army Stormzy. Assault divisions were formed by the Russian military command as part of certain Russian military units. The military command was working to strengthen the army assault groups. Taking into account the experience of leading Wagner PMC assault groups, the principle of the establishment of such companies involved the recruitment of persons from the reformatory similar to the Wagner units. However, the Azov Regiment managed to inflict heavy damage on the military company network that the Russians wanted to establish on the territory of Ukraine by capturing the soldiers of the Stormzy assault companies. In other words, the operation mission was successfully completed by the soldiers of the 2nd Assault Battalion of the 3rd Brigade of Ukraine. Units of the Russian 72nd Brigade tried to retake lost positions but were unsuccessful. So after all this, what is the latest situation in Bakhmut, the stronghold of the war? While many of Kiev's claims on the battlefield remain unconfirmed, it is clear that Ukrainian forces have made minor gains north and south of Bakhmut in recent weeks, breaking the Russian defensive position in a key battle that began on May 6. Speaking during a visit to Ukrainian troops on the Eastern Front, General Sikorsky claimed that Ukrainian forces continued to advance in the suburbs of Bakhmut and were close to tactically encircling the city. Also, Major Rodion Kudryasov, a commander in the Ukraine 3rd Assault Brigade, noted that the Ukrainians continue to make small but significant gains around Bakhmut. The Wagner Group still maintains its positions on the Bakhmut front lines, so Commander Prigozhin continues to keep his mercenaries in Bakhmut to snatch whatever he wants from the Russian administration at any time. Withdrawing forces from an active front is no simple task and may leave Russia vulnerable to attacks by Ukrainian troops high up on the outskirts of the city. Given the widely reported tensions between Wagner and Russia's military leadership and communication problems within Russian ranks, analysts say Ukraine will watch for cracks to be exploited on the battlefield, even if Commander Prigozhin does not withdraw his fighters now. Military analysts have noted that Russia will face difficulties in controlling Bakhmut, especially as Ukrainian forces are preparing a counterattack that could escalate clashes along other parts of the 600-mile-long front line. Russian forces will likely need additional reinforcements to hold the city of Bakhmut and its flanks at the expense of operations in other directions. For this reason, Russian President Vladimir Putin would be dependent on Wagner forces in every way. Even Ukrainians and British military intelligence reported that there was evidence that the Russian army had sent thousands of soldiers to the region. Ukrainian Deputy Defense Minister Hanna Maliar said in a statement that the Ukrainian army continues to fight for dominant heights around the city while clearing areas of the city under Russian control. Considering all these explanations, the Ukrainians still claim that they have besieged at least part of the city. That is, the Ukrainian authorities report that they are putting pressure on the north and south of Bakhmut, causing some local retreats of the Russian forces there. It looks like the situation in Bakhmut will continue like this for a while because it is thought that Russia does not have much power to change the general course of the city at this moment. The Russians paid a heavy price for a counterattack that did not yield many gains at Bakhmut. This comes entirely from the way Russian forces fought in some parts of the city. The Russian army, like stormtroopers, is using more human wave-style attacks on Ukrainian positions. It is therefore probably inevitable that Russia will have to undertake another round of mobilization this year to replace losses. So why does Russia continue to insist on this issue despite having suffered so much damage in the war? For Bakhmut, Russian President Vladimir Putin is actually aware of the answer to this question. Yes, Russian and Wagner losses in Bakhmut were almost unstoppable. But President Putin must have something to offer the Russian people and his soldiers against all these losses right now. This is why the Russian leader is so persistent in ordering his troops to seize Bakhmut. But President Putin's insistence seems to result in a very critical situation for Russia. The reason for this is thought to be the inability of the Russian army to increase its defense expenditures due to economic instability. And Ukraine, on the contrary, is easily renewing its inventory with military aid. If things continue this way for the Russians, it seems likely that the Ukrainian army will first take full control of Bakhmut. If the Ukrainian forces can completely clear the Russian soldiers and Wagner combatants in Bakhmut, it may be the beginning of the end for the Moscow administration because Vladimir Putin believed strongly in the war in Bakhmut. The Russian leader even showed a lot of favor, as we mentioned, even to Wagner commander Yevgeny Prigozhin, just for the acquisition of the city of Bakhmut. But the current picture is not at all what Putin intended. The days are very active in Bakhmut, where both sides have declared victory. Ukraine surrounds Russia at Bakhmut after Wagner's victory. Ukrainian Deputy Defense Minister Hanna Maguire said in a statement that Ukrainian troops managed to semi-encircle the city of Bakhmut and fight Russian forces in the region. Hanna Maguire told Telegram that the Russian troops failed to besiege Bakhmut and they lost some of the dominant heights around the city. This means that Ukrainian forces are advancing along the flanks in the suburbs, making it very difficult for Russian soldiers to stay in Bakhmut. Ukrainian troops took the city under siege. This gives the Kiev troops the opportunity to destroy the Russian soldiers. Therefore, Russia is forced to defend itself in the part of the city it controls. Anomaly added that Ukrainian troops still have control over industrial and infrastructure facilities and the private sector in the Lvivsk district in Bakhmut. Malia's remarks came a day after a private paramilitary unit, the Wagner Group, claimed victory in Bakhmut. The group's founder, Yevgeny Prigozhin, claimed that the city had been completely taken over by Russian forces. The Russian Ministry of Defense also supported the claim, stating that the offensive actions of the Wagner forces and Russian troops completed the capture of the city. Prigozhin recently posted on his Telegram channel a video in which he is holding a Russian flag in front of his soldiers and claiming that his forces have taken full control of the city. The Wagner leader claimed that Bakhmut was completely taken at noon on May 20, 2023. In the video he shared on Telegram, Ukraine denied the Wagner leader's allegations. Also, according to the Ukrainian news agency Pravda, Prigozhin's words contradict what Colonel General Oleksandr Zelensky said about the Ukrainian army continuing its operations in Bakhmut while advancing on the flanks. Oleksandr Soitsky stated that they continue to advance along the flanks in the suburbs of Bakhmut and are in fact very close to besieging the city. Tactically, Suzuki stated that in this way they can control and gradually destroy all multi-story buildings occupied by Russian troops. Sergei Kiribas, spokesman for the Eastern Group of Forces of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, recently stated that the Ukrainian army is holding positions in the southwestern part of Bakhmut. According to Pravda, the Institute for the Study of War, a US-based think tank, reported earlier this week that Ukrainian troops had crossed Russian defensive lines south and southwest of Ivanovskaya and northwest of Kievskaya. The Institute for the Study added that Russian forces had withdrawn and moved to new positions north of Sakoivanzeti, about 15 kilometers north of Bakhmut. As can be seen, the achievements of the Ukrainian armed forces in Bakhmut are also confirmed by Western sources. According to UK defense officials, Russia has redoubled its efforts to take Bakhmut by increasing the number of troops deployed to the town of Donetsk following Ukraine's tactical gains on Bakhmut flanks this month. Russia has redeployed several battalions to strengthen this sector, defense officials said in a statement. Defense officials said the redeployment represented a significant commitment by the Russian command, as Russia maintains relatively few unaffiliated combat units in Ukraine. A separate assessment by the Institute for War Studies reported that Ukrainian counterattacks halted the chances of Russian forces encircling the area. The think tank said the other day that these counterattacks forced Moscow to allocate scarce military resources to defend against a limited and localized offensive effort. Earlier that day, Ukraine's Eastern Operations Command spokesman Sergei Herwady announced that Kiev forces had gained the upper hand near the town after months of fighting, advancing 500 meters on one flank and 1,000 meters on the other. Ukrainian armed forces advanced step by step in Bakhmut. This advanced corners the Russian troops. Russian troops are trying to escape by retreating from some areas. But Bakhmut, the stronghold of the East, continues to be the focus of the claims. When we look at the hot breaking points in Bakhmut where both sides claim victory, we realize that Ukraine is closer to victory. Who will win in the Bakhmut clashes? We will see this more clearly in the coming days. So is it possible to stop the war in Ukraine? In the Ukraine war, America may seem like the great balancing power. Washington must cooperate with its ally in Turkey, who longs for peace between Ukraine and Russia, and organize the largest peace conference. It has been a year since the capital of Ukraine, Kiev, was liberated from Russian occupation. However, Russia retains the Russian-speaking provinces in eastern Ukraine and the strategic port of Crimea, as it has for years. For now, neither side has been able to fundamentally change this balance. Many striking attempts have been made. None of them change the status quo. The escalation is a dangerous prospect given that Russia is a nuclear-armed power. Moreover, whether it is true or not, the Russians think that a Ukraine that enters NATO's orbit will become a base from which NATO can attack the Russian Federation. Given these factors, it is unlikely that Moscow will simply withdraw from Ukraine. For Putin and his autocratic regime, it's a matter of survival. On the other hand, the only reason why NATO has acted behind Ukraine against Russia is that NATO failed to act behind its counterterrorism mission in the 1990s and early 2000s. Even today, with Russia again waging war in Europe, NATO members are at odds over how to deal with Russia. Many assume that Russia's attempt to invade Ukraine would be the proverbial kick. The normally apathetic NATO alliance needed to come together. Yet divisions among key members of the alliance have never been greater. The burden of supplying and supporting the war often fell on the overburdened shoulders of the United States, the only country across an ocean with other global responsibilities. Also, standing strong against Russia in Ukraine is not enough. First of all, Ukraine is not a NATO member, contrary to what many think. Then there is the question of cost and a limit to the seemingly endless military commitment to Ukraine. Therefore, peace must come to Ukraine. A peace table should be established under the leadership of the United States of America and the Republic of Turkey. At this table, it should be ensured that Vladimir Putin completely leaves the territory of Ukraine. But as President Joe Biden has said, the world will truly be plunged into an apocalyptic world war if the Americans begin to bring warplanes into the war, or if the Russians fulfill their ever-increasing threat to use nuclear weapons on Ukrainian targets. Just one day after President Joe Biden announced to the heads of state at the G7 summit of U.S. support for an F-16 coalition to train Ukrainian pilots, 2 NATO members have publicly jumped on board. Both Portugal and Denmark will reportedly train Ukrainian pilots. Denmark is potentially supplying F-16s. Danish Acting Minister of Defense Trump's Dalen Paulsen said that after completing the training efforts, we will go one step further and discuss whether we can donate 16 fighter jets. Danish F-16s, though built as Cold War A, B, Block 10s, and B Block 15s, have been upgraded as part of the Joint Midlife Update program that gives them capabilities closer to existing U.S. Block 50 by 52 variants. But F-16 deliveries and support will be highly conditional. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, in his statements at the G7 summit, stated that attacks on Russian soil continue to be prohibited for U.S. supply systems. Although no clear idea has been reached with the delivery of the systems, these systems will double Ukraine's air success. However, there is another point to be noted here. Can Russia use its nuclear trump card against F-16s? As a result, it is time to put aside the emotionality of all parties, to use the coldness of logic, and to establish peace. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and follow us. Thanks for watching.